Okay, let's just say it. VR specifications are sort of bullshit. They really are vague indicators, and some things like displays are just a raw starting point. The experience that any individual has in VR can be all over the map for the exact same headset, and the image quality that you see in VR can be all over the place for the exact same display. So let's start with 4K displays. That's pretty much bullshit. It means nothing. The 4K spec is 2160 vertically. So if you've got a 2550 by 2550, you're 4K. I mean, it's meaningless. So don't read into it, don't care. When you see 4K headset, just move on. How about field of view? Well, it's a starting point. Some match what you're going to actually see better than others. So on my big screen beyond, they say 102-degree horizontal field of view. And with my thin cushion, I'm getting 100 degrees horizontal field of view. Very close. But that's with a custom cushion that's putting my eyeballs right just barely outside of eyelash distance from the lens. Now, let's look at the Varjo Aero. The factory says, or the company says, 115 degrees. But they add a qualifier to that. They say at 12 millimeter distance between your eyeball and the lens, you get 115 degree field of view. Okay, that's great. Except the facial interface pretty much defines where your eyeballs land, and they do not have any adjustment for where the display lenses are to your eyeball. So the Valve Index had this, and it was very cool. So if you had glasses, you could put them on, put on the headset, and crank it out. Or you'd probably crank it out before you put it on so that your glasses wouldn't touch the lenses. Then you could take the glasses off if you had contacts or didn't need it, and you can crank it all the way in until your eyelashes were pretty much on the displays. I never got my eyelashes to touch, so there was still field of view that was left on the floor even with the Valve Index and that adjustment. With a generic interface, you just don't know where your eyeball is going to land in relation to the lens. And without being able to move the lens in as close as you can get, you're never going to maximize the field of view. So big screen beyond, custom cushions, they're able to optimize that view for me. Valve Index, and pretty much nobody else has that feature. It's a great feature, be nice to have. It would allow more people to actually see the field of view that the manufacturers say is possible. Okay. Now, let's also look at the differences in people. So I just mentioned with the Varjo Aero that they claim 115. Now, if you look at my WIM FOV, I got 102. Were they lying? Well, that's where my face landed. I have another friend who got a Varjo Aero, and he posted his WIM FOV. He got 112. Different face, much closer. Also, if you look at my WIM FOV, you'll see that it's off center by a couple degrees because I couldn't get myself centered in that. That generic interface had so much play side to side, I could not half the time even get in the center of the display. I was always off a little bit, and it also moved around on me a lot in play. So anyway, that's another issue. So, so let's talk about marketing. So we talked about 4K being meaningless. People compare displays and assume that's what's involved. And with the TV set, it kind of is. You get a display, and the specs say most of what there is to it. There's coatings and a few other things. I've got an 85-inch TV behind this backdrop, and it's an ultra-high def TV, and it replaced a high-def 75-inch TV. And at 75-inch diagonal and 10 foot away, I wouldn't be able to resolve any more resolution. At 85, I'm at 112 ppd. So clearly my retina cannot resolve all of the resolution on that 4K 85-inch display. So what the hell is an 8K display for? It's all about margin. So they're trying to sell 8K TVs because they want to make more money. It's something else to sell because they've commoditized ultra high def and they need a way to make money. So out comes the 8K. And if you've got a 16-foot diagonal, go for it. I don't know what the hell that would cost, but go for it. So you can see the marketing on that. Now, 4K, does my 4K look better than my HD? Yeah. And that's because it has better contrast, it's brighter, has more dimming zones. There's a new, the HDR spec came out for it, right? So there's HDR10, there's Dolby Vision. So they allow me to watch a movie and it'll have more dynamic range than the HD spec allows for. So it wasn't the increase in resolution. The exact same resolution would look nearly as good. And I probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference 99% of the time. So the extra resolution it's more marketing than anything else. So, you know, take that for what it's worth. So, so let's look at PPD. So you see a TV, and the PPD is pretty much consistent. You've got a flat display. It has an even number of pixels distributed across the entire area of the TV set. That's not the way it works in a VR headset. When somebody says 35 PPD, it does not mean that you have 35 PPD across your display. The display itself does, but what you actually see does not. And some companies are a little more forthcoming about this. If you look at Varjo with the Aero, they put out a bullseye chart, and it shows that 35 PPD in the center 20%, and then they show 40 degrees and 60 degrees, and a drop in PPD. This is kind of like averages. It's not going to be on boundaries like that. It's going to be kind of, you know, graduated. But they're giving you an idea of how it drops off away from the center of the display. Big Screen Beyond did the same thing. They put out a bullseye, and you can see it's 32 in the center, and by the time you get all the way out to the outer edge, you're at 21 PPD. And that's what you have to deal with. You're taking a display, and then you're trying to spread the pixels out wider. When you spread the pixels out wider, they're going to drop off as you go to the edges of the screen. There's no way to get around that. But as I mentioned before, the display is just the raw data. Okay, it has some physical attributes. It has a certain amount of resolution on the display. It has a certain amount of brightness. But two VR headsets with the exact same display are not going to look the same. So you can have color cast differences. You can have, well, the lens itself can change the color cast of something. The display has a certain amount of nits that come out of it, right? So let's just say here's your display. And going forward, if you have a lens over it, there's going to be some spillage. You're going to lose some of the light, and getting the resolution around the edge is a little harder. Now, I've got some images that I took with my my camera of the 85-inch display I've got showing a grid pattern. And I've got a 10mm rectilinear view, and I have a 10mm fisheye view. And what you can see in both of those pictures is there's vignetting, which means there's light drop off at the outer edge. So when the lens took the picture, it did not get an even amount of light all the way out to the edges of the sensor taking the picture. So in a normal display, it's going to get darker around the edges of the periphery. There's also going to be, you know, the difference in the visual quality that you see. Now, if you look at the Crystal's display at 2880 by 2880, they've got a single spheric lens over it, and they get a certain amount of nits at your eyeball. And then if you look at the VR1, They've used two lenses, and what they're able to do is put one lens closer to the display to capture more of the light, more of the resolution, and focus that resolution and light back onto the second lens. So there's less loss, better color, better brightness, and sharper. So even though they're spreading the pixels out over an extra 20-25 degrees more field of view, they're still getting a sharper image. Now, I can't say it's a sharper image across the entire display, but they're definitely getting a sharper image in a chunk of it. So when people start advertising by their display, and this is going to happen much more going forward, the display costs are going to start coming down. It'll be easy to slap a high-resolution display on a headset. All of the meat of the headset design is going to be in the lenses and the ergonomics. So if you think that they're equivalent for having the same display, you're going to be entirely incorrect on that. And if you think you're future-proofing by buying something with a higher resolution display that can't really get it to you. So if you buy it now thinking, well, that'll future-proof me, but then a year or two later, another headset comes out using the same display and back, and yet it's able to give you an additional, say, 20 degrees of field of view and give you a sharper, brighter display with better color. How have you actually saved yourself? How have you future-proofed yourself? Yes, what you bought will look better later, but if you'd waited off to buy something, when you could actually drive it, I'm completely ignoring whether your CPU, GPU, and software with reprojection and dynamic foveated rendering and whatever other compression techniques they pull out of their, their hat to make things go better. Even without taking that into account, the hardware itself can be limited by a lot more than the display. It's like selling a car with the same horsepower. One car has a better suspension. You get around, you can feel better in the corners. The weight distribution is better and it feels better. So the 300 horsepower doesn't come out the same. One gets it to the ground better. One is a much better sports car. So it's not just the power that you got out of the engine, it's what you do with it. And that's the exact same thing we're dealing with. VR headsets are weakest link limited. That weakest link could be a crappy display, or it could be the lens over the display. Or it could be that it's so uncomfortable you can't wear it. Now, ergonomics are going to be a big thing. They should be a big thing already. And we're going to have a lot of different types of ergonomics over the coming years. You've seen what Big Screen Beyond has done now. They've optimized a headset for ergonomics. So it's lightweight, tiny, and form-fitting. And I've said before, I love my Big Screen Beyond. It is incredibly comfortable, and I just love how it feels. My Varjo Aero has a lot more resolution. But even though the Big Screen Beyond has less PPD, it felt sharper because of contrast. So when you look at an image, how sharp it is in your eyes is going to be determined by how well you can differentiate borders and edges and just the actual the content of what you're looking at. More contrast is just like adding additional sharpness. If you have more contrast, and it goes that way with photography, a good contrasty lens will resolve a better looking picture. It'll be sharper before you put it in Photoshop and add sharpening. It will look good right out of the camera, or much better right out of the camera. And the same thing is going to happen with the VR headsets. Now, you've got products like Amnolens, right? They were able to improve moire and CA and create a sharper image that adjusts for distortion. That's very cool. And they obviously have some techniques that some of the VR companies don't have in-house, because the VR companies have to create distortion maps so that they can get a rectilinear image out of an amorphous lens or even a pancake lens, there's going to be a distortion pattern. And the fact that Amnolence came in with a product that was able to do a better job than a lot of the headset manufacturers it's a very cool thing, because it shows there's room to improve, and I'm real happy about that. Okay, so let's get back to your experience in a VR headset. So your experience is going to depend on your head shape and how well you fit whatever your interface is with a headset. That's going to have an impact on your field of view. The weight and comfort is going to depend on your face and fit, whether it's hitting your nose or some other part, that's going to impact you. What you're personally sensitive to or immune to is going to have a big difference in what you're going to enjoy in a VR headset. So I've already mentioned many times that I enjoy my Big Screen Beyond, and there is glare there. I'm not immune to it in that I can see it under the right circumstances and it's quite pronounced. But most of the time in game, I don't notice it at all. I also don't notice persistence, and some people have had issues with that. In aspheric lenses, some people talk about swimming. So let's say you have your Aero or Crystal or VR1 or whatever, XR4, and you look at a point in space, and then you move your head while keeping your eyes on that same point in space, and then you just watch how things move around, and you can see the distortion inside the lens. And some lenses have a lot more distortion than others do. And something like Amnolence probably helps compensate for some of that as well. And NCA and Moire and all of that junk. And then now some displays will help take care of that if you're dealing with, say, the micro OLEDs. The pixel pattern on them is such that you're not likely to see the issues you will with the QLED, which just has a different pixel pattern, which especially with an aspheric lens is going to help distort and spread the image out in a lot of ways. Now, the other thing people are going to do is try to equivocate, and I've mentioned this before. You see that Meta has the Quest 3. It has sharp, edge-to-edge, clear pancake lenses, and assume that all pancake lenses can look as good as they do. And Apple's done a good job with theirs as well. And they've also got resolution that's in the same ballpark as, the XR4. So, and those are aspheric on the XR4. So you can get pancake lenses like that, but they're also very expensive. The optics are very difficult. Getting a good aspheric lens is also very difficult. And this is where I'm getting to with the whole idea that the display is just your starting point. It's what you do with the display that matters. If you can't get the horsepower to the pavement, it's wasted. If the resolution is lost due to blur, if you're adding all kinds of artifacts, it doesn't matter what the display is if the lens is screwing it up. So, and screwing it up may be a strong word. It's more a matter of maximizing the potential of your display. Think of it that way. So, I still think it doesn't make sense to buy ahead of the curve in terms of getting something with so much resolution that you can't do a damn thing with it for a couple of years anyway. You might get better local dimming, so you get a little less blooming with your contrast. But if you're not anywhere near maximizing the potential of that display, what's the point? And the lens technology is advancing dramatically now. And it may get to the point where really good optics become commonplace. But right now they aren't. Optics have all kinds of issues. I mean, my Varjo Aero, when I looked around while staring in space, I could see stuff moving all over the place. So the optics have distortion. It had chromatic aberration in Moire. And they came out with a tool to adjust for it, the red shift and blue shift and all of that. And I hadn't really noticed it until I adjusted with that tool, and then it was like, wow, that is a huge difference. It looks so much sharper. So once again, you can have a certain amount of resolution, and then because of artifacts, you lose quality. Because of distortions, you lose quality. Because of losing light, losing resolution, you lose quality. You're throwing away the potential of the display by not putting the right lens on it. So it's all about the lens. The displays are going to become commonplace. They're not yet, but they're going to be. And having a lot of resolution in the display doesn't mean diddly poop. It really doesn't. It's just your starting point. You've got that powerful engine, and now you need a suspension and drivetrain that get it to the ground. And unless you've got a good lens system, you're wasting time. So anyway, I kind of wrote this as a public service announcement because I see people, they watch one person's review and they've got one size face and they've got one set of sensitivities and immunities, you know, things that they care about. And then you see another person and you'll pick the one who matches up with the headset you think you want to get because, oh, well, this guy liked it and this guy didn't like it. Well, and I like this guy's review. And the fact is you don't know necessarily where you are on that spectrum. So you don't know what you're sensitive to, or you may not. And you may assume that X and Y are the same and they're going to give you a vastly different result. So you do not know what it's going to feel like until you put the headset on your own face. You're not going to know what field of view you're going to get. You're not going to know what kind of QA is involved. I mean, there's no specs for these things. There's no specs for CA, no specs for moire, no specs for distortion, no specs for edge-to-edge clarity. There are no specs out there to cover persistence and motion blur, and there's no, you know, just, there are a whole pile of things that all have to do with the lens design that are not in the specs and that you have no way of knowing until you see it for yourself. And I'm not saying reviewers aren't valuable. It's good to have people looking at it because a lot of reviewers will point out when they say, well, you know, this is sharp in the center and then it drops off at the sides, or you know, or you're having glare, or you're having issues with, you know, you can see some moire under certain circumstances, or CA, or you've got blooming in your local dimming, or any of a number of other issues that you can have. And none of that information is in the specs. It's all in the final execution. It's getting the most out of the display. And I just hope it makes sense to people that these are not apple and apple choices. They're just not. And just realize that when a marketing machine comes in and they start advertising specs, that if they say the field of view is this, well, maybe, maybe not. That's not a fast and guaranteed number that you're going to experience. When they say there's so much resolution, you may not see it. And how much of what they can produce you're going to actually see is all depending on the lenses. So the only thing I'm driving home here is lenses are going to matter more than displays. And pretty soon, high resolution displays are going to be a dime a dozen, but getting them to your eyeballs is going to be the tricky part. And the companies that can really nail lens technologies are the ones that are going to do this right. That's all.